In the remote town of Angarsk, Siberia, a darkness began to spread in the early 1990s. Women began to vanish, only to be found later brutally murdered. The man behind these heinous crimes was not an ordinary criminal, but someone who had vowed to protect the public. His name? Mikhail Popkov, a former police officer who would become one of the most prolific serial killers in modern Russian history. Mikhail Viktorovich Popkov was born on March 7, 1964, in Angarsk, a small industrial city in Siberia. He was described by many who knew him as a quiet and polite boy, a good student who kept mostly to himself. But even at a young age, there were hints of his darker nature. In his early 20s, Popkov joined the local police force, where he quickly earned a reputation for being hardworking and dependable. He married, had a daughter, and to all who knew him, he appeared to be a devoted family man. But behind this facade, Popkov harbored a growing obsession, one that would soon turn deadly. Popkov's life took a turn in the early 1990s. According to psychological evaluations, he began to develop a deep-seated hatred for women who he perceived as immoral. Some speculate this stemmed from a personal betrayal, suspicions of his wife's infidelity that triggered his need for vengeance. The murders began in 1992. Popkov's method was deceptively simple. He would drive around in his police car, often late at night, looking for women who were walking alone or appeared to be intoxicated. Offering them a ride, he would earn their trust by presenting himself as a helpful officer. But once inside his car, the women were already doomed. His first known victim was a young woman named Yekaterina, who was last seen accepting a ride from Popkov. Her body was found days later, beaten and raped, in a wooded area outside of town. This became a pattern, women disappearing after accepting rides, only for their bodies to be discovered brutally mutilated. He used a variety of weapons, axes, knives, and even screwdrivers, and always took his victims to remote locations where no one could hear their screams. Over the years, he would develop a methodical approach, targeting women whom he deemed unworthy or promiscuous. As the years passed, Popkov grew bolder. Despite his violent tendencies, he was known for being meticulous. He chose victims carefully, often women in their 20s or 30s who were out alone at night. Many of them were last seen leaving nightclubs, bars, or simply walking home from work. Local police had no idea that the killer was one of their own. They believed the murders were the work of multiple perpetrators due to the varying methods and locations. Even as the body count rose to over 30, the connection to Popkov was never made. Popkov's knowledge of police procedure allowed him to remain undetected for years. He cleaned crime scenes meticulously, used gloves, and transported his victims in his own vehicle, a police car, which few would suspect. By 2010, the case had gone cold. Families of the victims were desperate, and public pressure was mounting. It wasn't until a dedicated team of investigators revisited the evidence using newly developed DNA testing technology that they found their first real lead. DNA samples were taken from hundreds of male residents in the Angarsk area. When Mikhail Popkov's DNA was tested, it matched samples taken from multiple crime scenes. He was arrested in 2012. A breakthrough that would unravel one of the darkest stories in Russian criminal history. But even in custody, Popkov remained unnervingly calm. He initially confessed to 3 murders, believing it would be sufficient to receive a lenient sentence. But over the next few months, his confessions kept coming, and they didn't stop. By 2015, Popkov had confessed to 22 murders. However, investigators suspected the real number was much higher. His calm, almost indifferent demeanor during the confessions was chilling. He detailed each crime methodically, recalling specific events, and even seeming to enjoy the process of recounting his heinous deeds. He was dubbed the werewolf by the media, and the nickname was fitting. Each new confession added another chapter to a story that seemed too monstrous to be real. In 2018, Popkov confessed to an additional 59 murders, bringing his total to 81. These were women aged 16 to 40, all killed with the same brutality, all lured by the man in a police uniform they thought they could trust. On January 10, 2015, Mikhail Popkov was found guilty of 22 murders. He had confessed to these crimes in chilling detail, describing each act of violence with a calmness that unnerved even the most seasoned investigators. But this was just the beginning. Under Russian law, a life sentence in prison meant he could still be eligible for parole after 25 years, a prospect that horrified the public. As the investigation continued, more victims were identified, and Popkov's confessions continued to increase. In December 2018, After further investigation and a second trial, Popkov was found guilty of an additional 56 murders, bringing the total to 78 confirmed victims. This made him the most prolific serial killer in Russia's modern history, surpassing the infamous chessboard killer Alexander Pichushkin and Rostov Ripper Andrei Chikatilo. In court, Popkov remained emotionless. Even as the names of his victims were read aloud, he seemed almost indifferent to the gravity of his crimes. He would later tell investigators that he felt a sense of moral cleansing in his actions, believing that he was ridding society of women he viewed as impure. Popkov was sentenced to 2 life terms in a penal colony, plus an additional 9 years in a high-security prison. The judge labeled his crimes as unprecedented in their brutality and scale. The decision was met with relief from the victims' families, but it was a cold comfort. Many could not understand how such a monster could have lived among them for so long, hidden behind the respected badge of a police officer. Even after his conviction, Popkov's demeanor remained unnervingly calm. During interviews from prison, he continued to display no remorse. Instead, he expressed satisfaction with his actions, stating, "I don't believe I will ever be released, and I think that's probably the right decision." Psychologists who have examined Popkov believe he may be a classic example of a psychopathic personality, someone who lacks empathy and is driven by a need to dominate and control. His lack of remorse, coupled with his calculated methods, suggests a man who killed not out of rage, but out of a cold, clinical desire to exert power over his victims. Popkov's case continues to haunt the people of Angarsk and all of Russia. It raises disturbing questions about how such a predator could operate for so long without detection. Mikhail Popkov's story is one of the darkest chapters in Russia's criminal history, a chilling reminder of how the facade of normalcy can hide a monstrous reality. As a former police officer, Popkov exploited the very trust that society places in its protectors. Using his position to prey on the vulnerable, he operated in plain sight, evading suspicion for more than 2 decades, while terrorizing the town of Angarsk. The scars left by Popkov's crimes are still fresh. The people of Angarsk continue to live in the shadow of his brutality, grappling with the haunting memories and unanswered questions. Ultimately, Mikhail Popkov's story is not just about a single man's descent into madness, but also a reflection on the fragility of trust and the unpredictable nature of evil. His crimes remind us to remain vigilant, to question what we see, and to remember that danger can often wear a familiar face. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of the unexplained and the macabre. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that are true. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.